Thunder was supposed to be the fastest, most dynamic team in the playoffs, young legs, relentless pace, and a superstar in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's been nearly impossible to guard all year. But in Game 1, the Denver Nuggets didn't just win. They exposed something deeper, something fundamental. This wasn't just about hitting clutch shots or executing a smart defensive scheme. This was about dragging OKC into the one place they didn't want to be. A slow, half-court battle where their youth looked confused, their spacing crumbled, and their best player got turned into a passer. What Denver did wasn't flashy, but it was surgical, and now the blueprint is out. For most of the season, OKC lived off chaos. Their transition offense, defensive activity, and ability to generate mismatches made them look unstoppable against most teams. But the playoffs are a different animal, and the Nuggets know exactly how to kill momentum. From the opening quarter, it was clear Denver didn't want to run, they wanted to control. So instead of letting OKC play free, they walked the ball up, forced late clock possessions, and dared the Thunder to beat them in a slowed-down environment. This doesn't just affect scoring, it messes with rhythm, confidence, and flow. It was a complete shift in pace, and OKC looked uncomfortable from the start. Every time Shai got the ball in the half court, Denver showed him bodies. Not just one, not two, but three players creeping into his driving lanes. This is what made the difference. By walling off the paint, they didn't even need to trap him fully. All they had to do was position Jokic at the nail, a helper shading from the wing, and Shai's primary defender guiding him into traffic. The goal wasn't to stop him entirely, it was to force him into making tough reads under pressure. And once he gave the ball up, Denver just didn't believe that anyone else on OKC could consistently hurt them. We saw it over and over again. Dort, Case and Wallace, even J-Dub, they all got looks. But that's the thing. Denver wanted them to shoot. They were more than happy to leave Dort alone in the corner or have Wallace fire off a three if it meant Shai didn't get a clean path to the rim. That's the trade-off, and Denver was willing to live with it. It wasn't just smart. It was calculated disrespect. Beat us with your role players, they seem to say, because your star isn't getting anything easy. And then there's the off-ball defense. Every screen OKC tried to set for Shai was met with a switch or a drop that protected the rim. Jokic played it to perfection, not trying to contain everything himself, but instead playing angles. If it was a wing screen, they switched. If it was a big, Jokic showed just enough before recovering. The goal wasn't to stop the initial action, it was to kill the secondary attack. That's the part most teams struggle with, and Denver nailed it. The real story, though, is what this did to OKC's spacing. Without consistent shooting threats on the floor, the Thunder offense shrunk. Suddenly, what looked like 5-out spacing during the regular season turned into 3-out, 2-in. That's not just a diagram issue. That's real estate. And when you don't have room to drive, you start forcing shots. That's exactly what Shai did in the fourth quarter. Pull-up jumpers, contested mid-rangers, off-balance floaters. Yes, he hit some. But Denver was fine with that, because they knew he couldn't do it forever. What makes this even more impressive is how Denver balanced their physicality with discipline. They didn't bite on fakes. They didn't overhelp. They played just enough help defense to make Shai think twice. And that hesitation, that half-second pause before he makes a move, that's where the possession dies. That's where OKC loses their advantage. And the most dangerous part of all, Denver never looked rushed. They were composed, measured, and patient. And against a young team like the Thunder, patience is a weapon. In many ways, this was less about what OKC did wrong and more about what Denver refused to let them do. They refused to let the game get fast. They refused to let Shai get comfortable. And most importantly, they refused to panic. Even when OKC went on runs, Denver stuck to the plan. They trusted their rotations, trusted their coverage, and trusted that the Thunder would eventually beat themselves. And for one game, they were absolutely right. Let me know when you're ready for Section 2, or if you'd like any changes to this first part. As the second half unfolded, what Denver was doing became crystal clear. This wasn't just about defense, it was psychological warfare. They weren't just taking away OKC's strengths. They were daring them to lean into their weaknesses, and the Thunder walked right into it. Every possession, every dribble, every pass became a test. Do you trust your role players? And the answer, over and over again, was no. Let's talk about the pick and roll. For most teams, it's a weapon. For OKC, it became a trap. The moment Shai called for a screen, especially from one of the wings, Denver's coverage tightened like a vice. If it was Chet Holmgren setting it, Jokic played up to the level, but only just enough to clog the lane. If it was someone like Lou Dort or J-Dub, Denver just switched it outright. They were so confident in their perimeter defenders that they didn't care who ended up on Shai. The point wasn't to stop the initial attack, it was to remove the domino effect. And it worked. The typical flow Shai draws help, kicks to an open shooter, swing pass, drive, collapse and finish, was gone. Instead, every Thunder possession felt like a one-and-done move. They couldn't string together advantages, and when that happens, the shot clock becomes your biggest enemy. So many of OKC's plays ended in isolation bailouts or rush jumpers. That's not by accident, that's by design. One sequence in particular summed up Denver's entire defensive philosophy. Shai got a switch onto Jamal Murray, a matchup OKC usually loves. He drove left, only to be met by Jokic stepping up from the weak side and Michael Porter Jr. sinking down to cut off the corner. With nowhere to go, Shai hesitated, spun, and kicked it out. The ball swung around the perimeter, but there was no advantage. By the time it got back to him, the clock was under 5. Forced to shoot, he bricked a contested mid-range jumper. That's not just defense, that's suffocation. The Nuggets also did something really subtle, but incredibly effective. They neutralized Chet's pop game. Normally, Chet is lethal in the pick and pop, especially against drop coverage. But Denver pre-rotated early. The moment they saw Chet pop out, the nearest defender was already sliding up. They weren't letting him get into rhythm shots. Instead, they forced him to put the ball on the floor, where he's far less comfortable. It's a small adjustment, but it completely changed the math. Chet wasn't getting clean looks, and without his spacing, the lane got even more crowded. Even more telling was how Denver handled OKC's off-ball movement. The Thunder love to run actions where Shai gives it up, only to get it back after a screen or a handoff. It's their way of creating movement within isolation-heavy sets. But Denver sniffed it out every time. Aaron Gordon and Bruce Brown were locked in fighting over screens, denying passes, and blowing up dribble handoffs. And when OKC tried to get clever and reverse the ball to the weak side, Denver was already rotated. It was like watching a defense that had already seen the entire playbook. The result? Hesitation, misdirection, panic. You could see it in OKC's body language. They started overpassing, unsure of whether to shoot or drive, and every time someone hesitated, Denver closed the gap. 1 second of indecision was all it took. That's the thing about playoff basketball. It's not just about talent, it's about decisions. And right now, Denver's forcing OKC into all the wrong ones. But perhaps the most underrated part of this game was what it revealed about OKC's offense when Shai doesn't have it going. There's no plan B. Giddey barely touched the floor. Wallace and Dort are defenders first. J-Dub looked tentative, passing up shots and failing to punish closeouts. So when Denver sent extra attention to Shai, there was no one else ready to take over. That's a massive problem, because the deeper you go in the playoffs, the more teams are going to sell out on stars. And if your secondary guys can't create, you're finished. Denver didn't just win Game 1. They tested OKC's foundation. And when it cracked, they didn't back off. They leaned in harder. They loaded up more. They dared OKC's supporting cast to be great. And so far, they haven't answered. At this point in the game, the scoreboard was close, but the gap in control was enormous. Denver wasn't just matching OKC shot for shot. They were dictating every possession, every tempo shift, every reaction. The Thunder weren't playing their game anymore. They were playing Denver's. And that's where the real exposure happened. It wasn't that OKC didn't execute, it's that they had no alternative when Denver took away their first option. The more the game slowed down, the more isolated OKC's weaknesses became. Without the pace and flow that usually get them easy buckets, their half-court offense turned into a grind. Every possession started with hope and ended in frustration. And when you're relying on a single offensive engine, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to bail you out, that pressure builds. Denver knew that. They wanted the weight of every possession to fall on Shai's shoulders, not because he's not capable, but because no one is capable of carrying that load alone over 4 quarters. One of the most glaring issues was spacing. Again and again, Shai would drive, draw 2 defenders, and kick to an open man, only for that player to hesitate, reset, or clank a wide-open jumper. That hesitation, that's not just nerves, that's lack of confidence. And when role players don't trust their own shots, the offense dies. You could see it on Dort's face when he passed up a 3, on Wallace's body language after a miss, even on J-Dub when he'd catch the ball in rhythm and still hesitate. These aren't mistakes, they're symptoms. Denver amplified every one of them by staying home on shooters, making tight rotations, and recovering without scrambling. That's rare. Most teams have to choose between overhelping and giving up threes, or underhelping and letting stars cook. Denver somehow managed to do both, load up on Shai and contest everything on the perimeter. That kind of discipline doesn't just happen. That's coaching, chemistry, and championship experience. But even more important than the defense was Denver's offensive patience. They weren't rushing into shots. They weren't trying to match OKC's pace. Instead, they bled the clock, waited for mismatches, and went to work. Jokic in the high post, Murray in the 2-man game, Porter spacing the floor. It was clean, calculated, and cold-blooded. That contrast made OKC look frantic. Denver never looked desperate, even when the game tightened in the final minutes. And then came the turning point. Shai hits a tough mid-range jumper to take the lead. The crowd's into it. Momentum is finally swinging OKC's way. But what does Denver do? They don't flinch. They calmly inbound, run a high screen, get a switch, and Jokic calmly finds Aaron Gordon cutting for an easy layup. Just like that, OKC's run is dead. That's not a backbreaker because of the 2 points. It's a backbreaker because it reminds you who's in control. And let's talk about Aaron Gordon for a second. The guy doesn't get enough credit for what he does defensively. Guarding Shai for long stretches, fighting through screens, contesting without fouling, and rotating like a madman. He's not just a body. They trust him to be the first line of defense against one of the league's most efficient scorers. And he delivered. Every possession where Shai had to work just to get a shot off, that's Gordon's presence. That's Denver's scheme working to perfection. But even when OKC did create open shots, they missed them. And that's the part that turns good defense into great defense. Because once you start missing makeable looks, it seeps into everything. It tightens your handles, shortens your follow-through, and clouds your reads. You could feel it in the fourth quarter. OKC wasn't just being defended, they were being. It was around this time that OKC looked young. Not in a bad way, just inexperienced. You could tell they weren't used to seeing every gap closed, every driving lane cut off, every weak side shooter covered like this. It wasn't just physical fatigue. It was mental. The kind of pressure that only a team like Denver, with their playoff scars and championship pedigree, knows how to apply. This is where the biggest weakness of OKC gets revealed. Not their shooting, not their size, not even their depth. It's experience. They've never been in a series where every mistake gets punished, where every adjustment has a counter. And now that they are, we're seeing the cracks.